Hello. In the Crown of Aragon 639 years ago, it was May 22nd, 1387. My name is Jonathan Seyfried. I'm a PhD candidate in history at the University of New Mexico, and this is the Historian's Notebook, a podcast about how history gets made. Season 1 is titled Moltcara Compagnona. We're looking at a document from each day of the first year of the reign of King Joan I of Aragon and Queen Violante de Bar. Let's begin today's document. Before we begin today's document, I want to give a little shout out to someone whose birthday is today. That is my younger brother, Brian. Happy birthday, Brian. I hope you have a fun day and that you enjoy the birthday card that I sent you, which was a big long poem about farts. All right, let's talk about a document from 1387. All right, this one, actually, there's a real satisfaction to this document because there's a lot of different threads that come together here. And you wouldn't really know it just looking at this little document, but now that we've been through a lot of the discussion about the financial arrangements and the connection to the organization of the church and all of the efforts that Joan and Violante have been making in the last couple months, we're able to see a little document like this as an expression of a lot of the longer efforts that we've been tracking. At least that's my hypothesis. I think I'm right, but you can never be completely sure. Because remember, if you're feeling 100% sure about anything, feeling satisfied, nope. That is bad history. There's always puzzles. There's always possibilities. We just do our best to make arguments based on the evidence. And from that, we can, get some interesting stories, some lessons, some insights that we can apply. But, we're always looking at this in more of a scientific way, and that's the language of hypothesis, of experiment, of testing, and not in the form of pronouncements and certainties. And that is wisdom, folks, as opposed to just riffing as if you know something when you really don't. All right, off the soapbox now. Let's talk about this document. A couple interesting things about the apparatus of this document. First, look at how at the beginning we have Lore, and then it's been crossed out, but not only has it been crossed out, but it's like an attempt to erase it. So I think the attempt to erase it came first, and then the scribe was like, oh man, this is not getting erased, and so then they made a strike through. And this is the same person who yesterday was a little clumsy in their wording in the document about the prisoner in Elna. So the scribe here is Jacobo de Podio. I'm looking at the probata now. And we've got a similar probata to what we saw yesterday. So we've got a mandawit, and then we've got it looks like it could be a rex, although that doesn't quite look like the X. So this is just questionable to me again about, we don't have the mihi that we would usually have if it had come from the king or the queen directly. So I'm not quite sure what to make of this right now. We'll figure it out, I think, in the next couple months. Then we've got our factum per, Okay, so we have made by, then we have the same authority figure as yesterday, Hakme Payares, who is a knight, a counselor, and a maybe we can say pro notary, but I'm still feeling dissatisfied with that as the translation of that last word in the probata, the title, something like PROM, and then not sure. So the scribe accidentally failed to format this letter in the proper way. So you're supposed to, when you have lo re at the top, you're supposed to have a space. You're supposed to continue on in the next line. And notice that in the document that's on the second half of this folio, it doesn't start lo re, it starts nos Johannes, etc. So it's also, the other document is a Latin document. We actually looked at that one. That one is the one about the Mogabels, and it's from a couple days ago. So we're out of order, right? The documents are out of order because this one is from a later date at the top of the page than the one at the bottom of the page. So what to make of that? I can't quite figure out how they are getting these out of order. Like, why? Why do they have the one from May 22nd first? How is the flow of the documentation producing that? I really want to know. Okay, we'll figure it out. Now, what does it mean when you start a letter lo re versus nos Johannes, other than the language difference? I think that it could indicate something about the participation of Joan in the creation of this, but that is just a real, just maybe, possibly kind of guess there. So we'll just have to pin that question and start to think about that as we move forward a little bit more. There's one more apparatus that I want to discuss before we get into the content of this document. It's the addressee line at the bottom. We have fuit missa, okay, was sent to Berengario, and we know it's a Berengario because we have, after the G, the abbreviation that has something like an ER, and then after that we have an O. So they were careful to say Berengario de, and then I think we have a C and not a T. So we've got something like Coriles. And then we have a very dramatic, dominant abbreviation mark over the next word. That is the one for ER. And so this is very clearly mercatori, merchant. And then we have the shorthand for Cesar Augusta, and that would be Saragossa. So there is a merchant in Saragossa that is being written to, and what is being sent to this person? Well, there's been news sent about this person to the king or the counselors of the king. Manam vos que vista le present tremetats al fiel nostra en Johann de Muntros. So, you are being commanded, we command you, that, and then we've got vista la present tremetats. Basically, they have something present, and I think it's the report. It's not the person. Yeah, I think that Johann de Muntros sent them a report. The place that I'm getting report from is in line 2, Vagants. Les Vagants. Rebre les Vagants. So, received the reports of all of this, Totso. All right. Now, they have received a report. I think I'm getting Vagans right. I'm honestly not sure. But we're going to go with that for now. I did some work with the Diccionario Català Valencia Balear and also the glossary of medieval Catalan that I have from a book that I got at the UNM library. And so I've got these two resources to help me with some of the vocab, and it came in both of those I used for some of the tricky words in today's document. So, all right, I think the beginning of this letter is saying we have received a report from Johann de Muntros. Johann de Muntros is the person who got all these authorizations earlier this month to go out and collect money. All right. So, and to really be aggressive about it, the document that we looked at earlier, which is just below this one on the same folio, is all about the moga bells, and those are instruments to bring in cash infusions at a very large scale. So this Johann de Muntros has been granted a lot of authority and is expected to bring in a lot of money, and now there has been a report sent about this merchant Berengario de Coriles. And what does the report say? It says that this particular merchant of Saragossa is not paying the money. Why do I know that? It's because the whole purpose of this document is to tell this merchant why they need to pay the money to Johann de Muntros. And that's where we get the information in the next line, in line 3. All right, now line 3, the phrase sort of begins at the end of line 2, where we've got like a que fos degut, and then I think we have trossos. So this phrase is a tough one because the spelling of the word trossos it's one that is, it could almost be Croesus. So I did look up Crossus, but that didn't seem to come up with anything. And instead, when I put in Degut Trossos into Google Translate, I got a translation. I don't know where Google Translate is getting this, but it came up with due to the fact that. If you look up Trossos in the medieval dictionaries, you get the English translation pieces. So maybe there's kind of a colloquial sense here, something like due to the pieces that make up the explanation, something to convey that sense. But we have in this phrase, due to the blank of the 23rd day of February that has just passed. So it's referencing something that happened on an earlier day. So I think the sense of this we can kind of depend on and say, because of this thing that was done on February 23rd of this year. And what was it? Here's the end of line 3. We published our declaration. All right, now we're going into line 4. Made by our Lord the Pope. Okay, so that PPA with the abbreviation on the top, I believe, is the abbreviation for basically Papa with a flourish, like it's an open-topped A, and I can't quite unpack every single part of why that abbreviation mark looks the way that it does, but it's a fancy abbreviation mark, so I think we're really sure that we're talking about the Pope. So there was a declaration that was made by the Pope, and it was published, it was distributed by Joan himself, what are we referring to? We are referring back to Joanne's request to the Pope, and this I think was like a month ago, maybe a month and a half ago, to have the various ecclesiastical units around, and I think it was not just Saragossa and the province of Aragon, but maybe even more than that. But it was to have the Pope allow the king to get more money from them. And the reason for that was actually in another document that Joan had sent to the Archbishop of Saragossa, saying there's a rebellion in Sardinia and we need money to pay the troops to go put down that rebellion, and so you're going to have to pay. So there's been a couple different documents that have been little steps that have gotten us to this point. And I will link all of those in the show notes so that you can go and trace back the different episodes that I talked about, the documents that are now kind of getting brought together in this particular moment. One other important step in getting here is that Violante has been corresponding with the Pope, and her ambassadors in Avignon are making the case, and they've been doing that all along. So we can see that very soon after they began their reign in January, they were communicating with Avignon, sending people over there, and that it's been a real push to be able to get the Pope to agree that the king and the queen can get more money from the various ecclesiastical institutions in their realm. And that has been the whole deal from the beginning, is trying to increase the revenue that is flowing into the treasury, because it's becoming pretty clear to me that they have money problems from the very beginning. And so now here's one of the little streams that go into this big river of revenue. A particular merchant in Saragossa that is being told to give more money, which is interesting because it's not like a tithe. We're not getting money from a church organization, but the legitimacy for the additional tax has to do with the... Oh, wait a second, I think I figured it out. It has to do with the religious justification, but I think this merchant is somehow doing business with the Bishop of Huesca, because right after we have, in line 4, we've got mention of the Pope, so we have the rationale for why the money is being collected, but then we have, after that, what money is being collected. We have del, of the, and then we have arrendament. That's the rent. Okay, the rent, fet del bispat de Huesca. The rent made from the bishopry of Huesca. And then that's the end of the sentence, because the next word is capitalized and starts and also, and of this. So basically this merchant is somehow involved in the administration of the rents that are collected or demanded by the Bishop of Huesca. So look at how intricately woven together the secular financial officers and merchants are connected to, and how they're woven together with the ecclesiastical administrators on the money side. So these were not, there was just, I'm getting this picture now starting to form about how intricately tied together a lot of the financial arrangements were across all these different constituencies and money sources. So that's interesting. All right. So it's this merchant who's being told you have to pay up. But what is he needing to pay up? Some of the money that he got from the rents that are under the arrangement of the Bishop of Huesca. Interesting. How that all got worked out. I mean, sounds complicated. All right. Then we have another sentence which basically amounts to don't delay, or we're going to, have you pay even more money. So basically it says, e aso no triguets. Basically, and of this or about this, do not delay. And then it says, if you do, if you do, then we're going to raise more manleva, or we're going to levy more money against you. And I think what it says is like in an equal amount, semblant quantitant vostres missiones se correct. So basically, we've got a little threat here saying, pay this money that Johann de Muntros says you're not agreeing to pay. And if you don't, then we're going to have you pay even more. And also remember that the reason that you have to pay this money is because the Pope said so. So that's on February 23rd. So we've got a lot coming together. And I think that there is one way of looking at this to say this is all on Joan's side and we don't see anything of Violante here. But I think that would ignore just the huge amount of activity that we see Violante involved in when it comes to managing the relationship between the Crown of Aragon and the Avignon papacy. So it's an open question. Like, can we put this into the bucket of evidence for co-rule? I'm not sure, but I think as we're seeing all of these different threads kind of coming in together, and we see moments like this where it's the fruition of a lot of different efforts that we looked at in their stepping stones earlier in the year, maybe we'll start to make an argument and have an argument for putting documents like this into that bucket of evidence for how Joan and Violante worked together. We'll see what happens. Thanks for listening to this episode of The Historian's Notebook, Season 1, Molt cara compagnona. If you are leaving with more questions than you arrived with, like, who is this merchant in Saragossa? I've done my job. Remember, the motto of The Historian's Notebook is dissatisfaction guaranteed. Visit the website to see an image of today's document and additional show notes, and listen again tomorrow to hear about the next day in the first year of the reign of King Joan I of Aragon and Queen Violante de Bar. In the meantime, take care.